The morning it all ended began the way most mornings did. Quietly, with coffee I didn't taste and a silence I had learned to fill with ordinary sounds. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old, and for 9 years I believed I was the problem. I believed it the way you believe something that has been repeated to you so many times it stops feeling like someone else's opinion and starts feeling like your own memory. Like something you discovered yourself. Like something true. I was standing at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday in March, watching the coffee darken in the glass pot, when I noticed the notepad beside the refrigerator. It was one of those small spiral ones, the kind I kept for grocery lists and reminders. My handwriting covered the top half of the page: eggs, almond milk, the name of Lily's new teacher, a dentist appointment rescheduled twice. Below my writing, in the bottom corner, there were 4 numbers written in blue ink. Daniel's handwriting. Not mine. I stared at them for a long moment. They weren't a phone number, too short. Not a date. Not a price. Just 4 digits sitting at the bottom of my notepad like they had always been there, like I had simply never noticed them. I picked up the notepad, studied it, set it back down. By the time Daniel came downstairs, I had already convinced myself it meant nothing. That was the pattern. That was always the pattern. I grew up in Ashford, Ohio, in a house that smelled like lemon furniture polish and old carpet. My mother taught piano lessons in the front room every Saturday, and the sound of halting scales followed me through my childhood like background music. I could never quite escape. I became an art teacher, not because I was the most talented person in any room, but because I genuinely loved watching other people discover they could make something. There is a specific kind of joy in that. Quiet, reliable, the kind that doesn't ask for much. I met Daniel at a friend's graduation party 11 years ago. He was lean and careful in the way he moved, the kind of man who always seemed to be thinking 2 steps ahead of whatever was happening in front of him. He laughed at my jokes. He remembered things I mentioned in passing. A book I wanted to read, a restaurant I said I'd been meaning to try. In those early months he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected, and I mistook that attention for intimacy. We married when I was 29. Lily came 4 years later, and her arrival rearranged everything. The furniture of our daily life, the rhythm of our conversations, the way Daniel and I looked at each other across a room. Not badly, I told myself. Just differently. Parenthood did that to people. Lily was 6 now. She had Daniel's dark eyes and my tendency to go quiet when something bothered her. She collected small stones from the schoolyard and lined them up on her windowsill in a color order that only made sense to her, and watching her do it was sometimes the most peaceful part of my day. I taught sophomore and junior art at Ashford High. I had the same classroom for 7 years, east-facing windows, afternoon light that turned the white walls golden, the permanent faint smell of acrylic paint and turpentine that no amount of cleaning ever fully erased. My students called me Miss Claire, which wasn't technically correct but had stuck somewhere around year 3 and I'd stopped correcting them. My best friend was a woman named Mara. We'd met freshman year of college over a broken campus printer and a shared deadline. She was warm and funny and direct in a way I'd always admired. She said what she meant, or so I believed, and she had known me through every version of myself from 20 to 37. She lived 12 minutes from our house, worked in hospital administration, and had dinner with us at least twice a month. Daniel liked her. He always had. I thought that was a good sign. For 9 years I thought many things were good signs. The morning with the notepad, that particular Tuesday in March, Daniel came downstairs dressed for work, already in his coat, already holding his bag. He kissed the top of my head without pausing, poured coffee into his travel mug, checked his phone. "Did you take my keys?" he asked. "No," I said. He looked at me. Not long. Not with anger. Just that particular expression he had. Patient, faintly tired, like a man who had been through this exact conversation before and already knew how it would end. "They were on the hook last night," he said. "I didn't touch them." He opened the drawer beside the oven. The keys were inside, next to the takeout menus and the dead batteries we kept meaning to throw away. "Here," he said, holding them up. "I didn't put them there," I said. He looked at me again. That same expression. Then he zipped his bag, said goodbye to Lily, who was eating cereal at the table, and left. I stood in the kitchen after the door closed and tried to remember if I had touched his keys. I couldn't. But the fact that I couldn't remember felt, in that moment, like evidence against me. That too was part of the pattern. And I wouldn't understand that for a long time yet. Ashford in March still held the raw edge of winter. Bare trees, pale sky. The ground too hard for the crocuses that appeared every year along our front walk, small and determined and somehow always surprised by the cold. I drove Lily to school at 7:45 and arrived at Ashford High by 8:15, and the day arranged itself around me the way it always did. First period, second period, the 20-minute window at lunch I used to prep materials for afternoon classes. My classroom was my steadiest place. I had arranged it over 7 years into exactly the kind of organized chaos that only I could navigate. Reference prints pinned in careful rows along the south wall. Supply shelves labeled in colors my students could read from across the room. A long work table in the center that had accumulated so many layers of dried paint it had become its own kind of artwork. Students came in anxious about getting things wrong and left, most of them, understanding that getting things wrong was the point. I was good at my job. That was not arrogance. It was simply one thing I knew with certainty, and there were not many of those left. The first sign I registered, though I wouldn't name it that way for a long time, came about 6 weeks before the Tuesday with the notepad. It was a Saturday, early February. Daniel and I had plans to go to a dinner party at the home of his colleague Marcus and Marcus's wife, a woman named Denise who always served food that was slightly too ambitious for the number of people she was cooking for. I had bought a bottle of wine. I had confirmed the time with Daniel twice, once Thursday, once Friday morning. At 6 o'clock Saturday evening I was dressed and ready. Daniel came out of the bathroom in jeans and a sweater. "Where are you going?" he asked. "The dinner party," I said. He looked at me the way he always looked at me when I said something that didn't match his version of reality. Not shocked, not confused, but with a careful measured patience that implied I was the one who had misunderstood. "That was last Saturday," he said. "No," I said. "It's tonight. I confirmed with you Friday. Claire." He said my name in a specific way, not unkind exactly but waited. Like a doctor explaining a diagnosis. "We went last Saturday. Don't you remember? Denise made that lamb thing." I stood there in my dress with the wine bottle in my hand and tried to locate last Saturday in my memory. I remembered a Saturday that had been unremarkable. Lily's swimming lesson, grocery shopping, an early evening in front of the television. I did not remember a dinner party. "I don't remember going," I said. "I know," he said. "You've been doing that. Forgetting things." He wasn't unkind when he said it. That was almost worse. "Maybe you should talk to someone." I called Mara that night, after Lily was in bed and Daniel had gone to his office to work. I sat on the edge of the bathtub with the door locked and told her what had happened. "He said I already went," I said. "I have no memory of it." There was a brief pause. "Could you have just spaced it out? You've been exhausted, Claire." "I don't think so. You've been forgetting things a lot lately," she said. "Remember when you forgot we had lunch plans in January?" I did remember that. I had double-booked, gotten confused, arrived 40 minutes late. "That was different," I said. "Maybe," she said. "But honestly, you should listen to Daniel. Maybe seeing someone wouldn't hurt." I held the phone against my ear and stared at the tile grout and said nothing. Looking back now, that phone call was the moment I should have stopped and asked a different question. Not am I forgetting things? But why are the two people closest to me always in agreement about what I'm getting wrong? I started keeping a calendar on my phone. Not the shared family calendar Daniel and I both had access to. A separate one, in a notes app, where I recorded appointments, conversations, plans. I didn't tell Daniel about it. I couldn't have explained why, exactly. It felt slightly embarrassing, like installing a lock on your own diary. But I noticed over the following weeks that my records didn't match his. A dinner I had supposedly canceled and forgotten I'd canceled. A conversation about Lily's school schedule that he insisted we'd had on a Wednesday when my notes placed it on a Friday. A weekend trip to visit his parents in Columbus that he claimed I had agreed to enthusiastically, when I had no memory of agreeing at all, only of listening to him describe his plan and staying quiet because staying quiet had become easier than disagreeing. Each individual incident was small enough to dismiss. That was the thing I didn't understand yet, how smallness was the mechanism, not the exception. How a person could be taken apart piece by piece, each piece so minor it seemed almost rude to mention, until one day you looked up and didn't recognize the person looking back from the mirror. "You're losing your mind," Daniel said once, not cruelly, almost fondly, like it was a gentle observation about a charming flaw. We were in the car, arguing about whether I had agreed to cancel Lily's weekend playdate. I had not agreed. I had said I'd think about it. He was certain I had confirmed the cancellation. I'm not losing my mind, I said. I'm not saying it's your fault, he said. Stress does this. You take on too much. You've always done that. I looked out the window at the gray Ohio highway and said nothing. That was the first time he used that phrase. It would not be the last. And each repetition wore a slightly deeper groove into something I couldn't yet name. Mara had dinner with us on the second Friday of that month. She brought dessert, a bakery box of those small chocolate things she knew Lily loved, and she and Daniel talked easily through most of the meal about a renovation Marcus and Denise were doing on their kitchen, a news story neither of them could fully remember, a podcast Daniel had been listening to on his commute. I watched them talk. I don't know when I started doing that, watching rather than participating. It had happened gradually, the way most things had happened in our house. I had simply become a quieter presence at my own dinner table. The way furniture becomes invisible when you stop noticing it. After Lily went to bed, the three of us sat with wine in the living room. Mara asked how I was sleeping. Daniel answered before I could, said I'd been restless, that I sometimes got up in the night and didn't remember it in the morning. I do remember, I said. They both looked at me with the same expression. Patient. Concerned. I drank my wine and changed the subject. The notes app became a habit. I documented everything quietly without making a production of it, the way you develop any small ritual that helps you feel less unmoored. Date time, what was said, what I remembered. It was a strange thing to need. Felt occasionally like building a case against my own husband. And then I would remind myself that I was simply trying to keep track of my own life. And the fact that this felt transgressive told me something I wasn't quite ready to hear. March turned colder before it turned warm. Lily caught a chest cold and missed a week of school, and I took 2 days off to stay home with her, which meant catching up on lesson planning at night while Daniel worked late. He was in a heavy quarter at his firm, end of fiscal prep, he explained, the kind of period where his hours expanded without warning and his phone was permanently in his hand. I noticed the phone before I noticed anything else. Not that he had one, of course he had one. But the way he held it had changed. Face down on surfaces. Angled away when I passed behind him. Taken into the bathroom with the door locked in a way that hadn't been his habit before. Or if it had been, it had never registered until now. I mentioned it once, lightly, casually, not even as an accusation. Just as an observation I couldn't quite swallow back. You've been on your phone a lot. He looked up from the couch. It's a busy quarter. I know. I just meant. Claire. That tone again. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything. You're building a story, he said. You do this. You pick up on something small, and you construct a whole narrative around it, and then you're upset about a thing that doesn't exist. I sat down across from him. The lamp between us cast a warm yellow light that made everything look softer than it was. I'm not constructing anything, I said. I just noticed. You've been noticing a lot of things lately that aren't there. He set his phone down on the cushion beside him, face down. That's what worries me about you. I didn't answer. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for no real reason except that it was something to do. I didn't let myself cry. I hadn't cried in front of Daniel in over a year. Something in me had understood, even before I consciously understood anything, that tears were not safe there. They would become evidence. They would become another symptom of my instability, another data point in the case he was quietly, persistently building against my reliability as a witness to my own life. It was Lily who first planted the seed I couldn't unplant. We were in her room on a Thursday evening, the two of us on her floor with a puzzle, one of those children's geography ones with oversized pieces and illustrated animals on each continent. She was placing a penguin carefully on Antarctica when she said, without looking up, Daddy talks on his phone in the car. Lots of people talk on their phones in the car, I said. Not to work people, she said, still looking at the puzzle. He uses a different voice. I kept my hands very still on the puzzle pieces. What do you mean a different voice? She shrugged the way 6-year-olds shrug, total body, completely unself-conscious. Like when he talks to Mara. I placed the penguin on Antarctica. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the wind pushed against the window with a sound like held breath. You've heard Daddy talking to Mara? She picked up a lion considered South America, corrected herself. In the car. When he picked me up from school that time. I looked at my daughter's profile, the serious set of her jaw, the way her dark eyes tracked the puzzle pieces with absolute concentration. She wasn't trying to tell me something. She was simply reporting what she'd observed, the way children do before they learn which observations are safe to share out loud. That night I lay in bed beside Daniel and listened to him breathe in the particular rhythm of deep sleep, and thought about a different voice and a phone taken into every room and 4 numbers on a notepad that I could still see clearly when I closed my eyes. I didn't build a story. I simply stopped dismissing the materials. I called the therapist the following week. Her name was Dr. Anita Reyes. I found her through my insurance, chose her because her office was 15 minutes from Ashford High and her website said she specialized in relationship stress and identity. I didn't tell Daniel I was going. Not because I was hiding it, but because I had reached a point where his response to any information I volunteered had become unpredictable enough that I had quietly learned to say less. The first session was mostly intake. Anita, she asked me to call her that, was a compact woman in her early 50s with reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain and a habit of listening with her whole face. I told her about the forgetting, about the dinner party I couldn't remember, about the keys, about the quiet, persistent sense that reality in my home operated according to rules I hadn't been given and couldn't quite learn. Do you keep any record of these incidents? She asked. I showed her my notes app. She looked at it for a moment, then handed the phone back to me. How long have you been keeping this? She asked. About 6 weeks. She nodded. Not with surprise exactly. With the kind of careful neutrality that I would later understand was her version of paying close attention. Do you feel like yourself? She asked. In your daily life, your teaching, your friendships, do you feel like the person you know yourself to be? I thought about that for longer than I expected to. At school, I said finally. Yes. At school I feel like myself. And at home. I looked at the window. Outside, a magnolia tree was just beginning to bud. Small tight buds like closed fists along every branch. At home, I said. I feel like someone who is always about to be wrong about something. Anita wrote something down. I wouldn't know what until much later. I want to be precise about what I was and wasn't doing in the weeks that followed because the distinction matters to me. I was not investigating my husband. I was not following him, checking his email, going through his belongings. I was doing something smaller and, in some ways, more painful. I was simply paying attention to the things I had taught myself not to notice and writing down what I saw. The phone he kept face down. A receipt I found in the pocket of his winter coat when I brought it to the dry cleaner. Not for anything dramatic, just a restaurant I didn't recognize. A date 2 weeks prior when he had told me he'd worked late. A total that suggested 2 people. I photographed it with my phone and put the coat in the dry cleaning bag and drove to the cleaners and dropped it off and went to school and taught 2 periods of studio painting and didn't let my hands shake. I called the restaurant that evening. I don't know exactly what I expected. A woman named Mara who answered the phone and said, "Yes, I was here with your husband, that's how it usually goes in movies." Instead I got a hostess who told me reservations were private. And I hung up and sat in my car in the school parking lot until the heat from the engine faded and the cold came through the glass. The misdirection, when it came, was elegant in the way only long-practiced deception can be. Daniel came home one evening in mid-March with flowers. Not a grand gesture, just a grocery store bunch of tulips, the yellow kind, which he knew I liked. He put them in the glass vase on the kitchen counter and said he'd been thinking about what I'd said, about feeling disconnected, about the stress of the year. And that maybe we should take a weekend trip, just the 2 of us, leave Lily with his parents. He was warm that evening. Attentive. He asked about my students. He helped Lily with her reading without being asked. He put his phone face up on the counter when we sat down to dinner, and I noticed that too, noticed the deliberateness of it, the slightly theatrical quality of a man demonstrating transparency. And I almost let it work. That is the honest part. I almost let the tulips and the warm evening and the face-up phone reroute my attention back toward hoping. Because hope is easier than evidence. Because it costs less, at least in the short term. I hadn't built a real relationship. I'd been maintaining the appearance of one. And for years I had been telling myself that was the same thing. That particular realization arrived quietly, sitting across from Daniel over dinner while he laughed at something Lily said. And it didn't feel like revelation so much as something settling into place. Like furniture that had always been slightly wrong finally stopping moving. That night, after Lily was asleep, I went to Anita's second session. I had been scheduling appointments at 7 p.m., late enough that Daniel assumed I was at a school planning meeting, which I hated lying about, but which had become necessary in the specific way that small self-protective dishonesty becomes necessary when honesty has proven unsafe. I told Anita about the receipt, about Lily's observation in the car, about the tulips. How did the tulips make you feel? She asked. Suspicious, I said, which made me feel guilty, which is probably the point. She was quiet for a moment. Claire, I want to ask you something, and I want you to take your time with it. When you make an observation about Daniel's behavior, the phone, the receipt, any of it, what happens inside you before you say it out loud to him? I thought about it. I rehearse it, I said. I figure out how to phrase it so it doesn't sound like an accusation. I try to make it small enough that he can't say I'm overreacting. And when you say it? He finds the way it's wrong, I said. There's always a way it's wrong. Either I misremembered, or I'm building a story, or I'm stressed and not thinking clearly. Anita took off her glasses and set them on the arm of her chair. The notes you're keeping, she said. Have you noticed any pattern in the types of incidents he disputes? All of them, I said. Every incident I bring up. There's no version I'm allowed to be right about. She nodded very slowly. I want to be careful, she said, about how I frame what I'm going to say. But what you're describing, the consistent invalidation of your perceptions, the way your memory is challenged on specific subjects, the gradual narrowing of what you're allowed to trust about your own experience, these are recognizable patterns. Gaslighting, I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. Too large. Like a diagnosis I wasn't sure I'd earned. That's one framework, she said. What matters more right now is whether it matches what you've been living. I looked at the magnolia tree outside her window. It was the same one I'd noticed the first session, but the buds had opened slightly, still closed but less tightly. Somewhere between shut and open. It matches, I said. 2 days later I came into Anita's office for my third session to find her standing at her filing cabinet with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Composed, but with something careful underneath it. She asked me to sit down. I want to tell you something, she said. And I want to be very direct about it, because I think you've been around enough in direction. She opened a folder and set it on the desk between us. Inside was a small Samsung phone in a gray case. Not mine. Not one I recognized. This was found in this room, she said carefully, between the chair cushion and the frame. We believe it was left during a previous appointment. I stared at it. We have appointment records, she said. The session immediately before yours, since you began coming here, has consistently been booked under a different name. A name I cannot share with you for confidentiality reasons. She paused. But I can tell you that after speaking with my office manager and reviewing our protocol, I have concerns significant enough that I felt you needed to know this device was found here. The room was very quiet. The heat clicked through the baseboards. Outside, a car passed on the street below. He was having me followed, I said. It wasn't a question. Anita didn't confirm or deny, but she didn't look away either. I sat with that for a long moment, the image of Daniel booking an appointment with my therapist under a false name, sitting in this same chair, leaving a phone in the cushion, listening to what I said in the one place I believed I was finally safe to say it. Something in me that had been bracing for a very long time went completely, perfectly still. I did not go home immediately. I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Anita's office and ordered something I didn't drink and sat at a corner table and called my sister in Columbus. Her name is Peg. She's 43 and a divorce attorney, and she's been asking me quiet questions about Daniel for about 3 years that I've been answering too quickly in the wrong direction. Listen to me carefully, I said when she picked up. I need to know what I should do in the next 48 hours before I say or do anything I can't take back. She listened. I told her everything, the notes app, the receipt, Lily in her bedroom with the puzzle, the phone in Anita's chair cushion. Peg asked 4 specific questions and then was quiet for a moment. Don't confront him tonight, she said. Don't change anything in your behavior. I'm going to send you some information. You're going to read it. And then tomorrow evening, if you're ready, we're going to talk again. I asked her one question before I hung up. Did you know? About Mara. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. I suspected, she said. I didn't have anything real. I sat with the untouched coffee until it was cold. I had one more thing to do before I went home, and I did it sitting in that coffee shop corner with the noise of the espresso machine and other people's ordinary conversations around me. I opened my phone and called Mara. She answered on the second ring, warm and easy the way she always was, the way she had always been. The voice of the person I trusted most outside my marriage, the one I'd called from the edge of my bathtub, the one who had gently, consistently agreed with Daniel about my unreliability. Hey, she said. What's up? I'm calling to tell you, I said, that I know. I don't know all of it yet. But I know enough. Silence. Claire. I don't want an explanation tonight, I said. I'm not ready for that yet. I just wanted you to know that I know, so you can't be the one who decides when I find out. I hung up. My hand was steady. That surprised me, and then it didn't. I went home and made dinner. Pasta, the simple kind, the kind Lily always asked for. I set the table. I gave Lily her bath. I read to her from the book we'd been working through. A story about a girl who builds a boat from salvaged wood and sails it down a river. And I sat beside her until her breathing slowed into sleep. Then I went downstairs. Daniel was on the couch. Phone face down on the cushion. He looked up when I came in and gave me the familiar half-smile, easy and practiced. Good session, he asked. He always asked about my sessions. I had never until now understood why. Sit down, I said. Something shifted in his face. Very small, very fast, like a card turned over and turned back. I am sitting down. Daniel. I kept my voice even. I want to have a real conversation. I need you to stay here and have it with me. He stayed. He crossed his arms and leaned back slightly, and the expression he settled on was the patient, slightly tired one I knew so well, the one that said he was already preparing to explain to me how I was wrong about whatever was coming. I know about the phone in Anita's office, I said. He didn't move. Not a flinch, not a shift of weight. That kind of stillness is a skill. Takes practice. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. I think you do. Claire. His voice was gentle, concerned. Whatever Anita told you, she's not supposed to be discussing other clients, and if she implied. She didn't imply anything, I said. She showed me a phone. A phone that was found in her office during the window when you were paying someone to have me followed. Or going yourself. I don't know which yet. This is exactly what worries me about you, he said, and the gentleness in his voice had acquired an edge, something sharp hidden inside the softness. You are taking something coincidental and building a conspiracy out of it. You do this. You've always done this. I have watched you come apart in slow motion for 2 years, and I have tried to be patient. Stop, I said. He stopped. Not because I asked him to. Because something in my voice had changed and he heard it. I have 9 months of notes, I said. Every incident. Every conversation where you told me I misremembered something. Dates, times, exactly what was said. I have a photograph of a receipt from a restaurant you told me you were working late. I have my daughter's observation about a phone call she overheard in your car. I paused. And I have a sister who is a divorce attorney who I called 40 minutes ago. The room was very quiet. The lamp between us cast the same yellow light it always did, and the furniture was the same, and the house was the same house it had always been, but something had changed in the atmosphere of it, something that could not be unchanged. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. The patient expression was gone. Underneath it was something I hadn't seen before, or hadn't let myself see, something flat and assessing like a man calculating odds. You want to do this, he said finally. Not a question. I don't want to do anything, I said. I want the truth. I've been asking for it for 9 years in languages I didn't know I was speaking, and I'm asking for it plainly now. Another long silence. He picked up his phone, face down as always, force of habit, and then seemed to catch himself, and set it face up with a small deliberate movement that might have been meant as something. Mara and I, he started. I know about Mara, I said. He exhaled. How long? I'm not sure it matters. It was, he stopped. Started again. It wasn't what you're making it. I'm not making it anything, I said. I stopped making things a while ago. You were doing that for both of us. He looked at me then, genuinely looked at me, maybe for the first time in years without the filter of calculation or the soft, practiced concern, and I watched him try to find the version of this conversation where he came out ahead, and watched him not find it. Are you leaving? He asked. I'm going to bed, I said. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to my sister again. Tonight I just needed you to know that it's over. The part where I don't know. That part is over. I turned off the kitchen light on my way upstairs. The house behind me was very still. I should say something about Mara because the story of what Daniel did is only part of the story, and Mara's part is the one that took longer to process. She came to the door 2 days after my call. I had expected her to. She was not the kind of person who could tolerate unresolved things, which was an irony not lost on me. I stood in the doorway and didn't invite her in. She had been involved with Daniel in varying degrees of intensity for just under 3 years. But that was not the part that broke me. The part that broke me was learning from her own hesitant, tearful accounting on my front step, that she had known about the gaslighting. Not caused it, but known. Known that he had taken her phone calls as data points, known that he discussed my sessions, known that he was systematically making me doubt myself, and had stayed quiet in the way that guilty people stay quiet, by convincing themselves that staying quiet was a form of neutrality. I thought he would stop, she said. Did you think that, I said? Or did you just need to believe it? She didn't answer. The wind came along the porch and lifted a strand of her hair and she pushed it back with the automatic gesture I had seen her make 1,000 times. And standing there watching it I felt something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. Something more like the final piece of something sliding into place and locking. I think you should go, I said. She went. I stood on my porch for a while after in the cold, looking at the crocuses that had finally come up along the front walk, small and purple and completely indifferent to how long the winter had been. The divorce took 11 months. Peg handled most of it, which helped in practical terms and also in the stranger way that having someone in your corner who had always been in your corner helps quietly without requiring you to justify yourself. Daniel contested certain things. He was skilled at contesting things. But he had underestimated the Notes app, and the photograph, and what Lily had overheard, and the particular precision with which a woman who has been keeping records of her own reality for 9 months can present those records when asked to. He moved out in April. Into an apartment across town, then into a rental house, then, by the time the divorce was final the following February, out of Ashford entirely. He took a position with a firm in Cincinnati. I don't know the details and I didn't ask. Lily adjusted in the quiet, serious way that she approaches most things. She asked me once, sitting at the kitchen table over homework, whether Daddy had been mean to me. I thought about how to answer that for a long time. He was unkind in ways that were hard to see, I said finally. But you don't need to worry about that. That's for grown-ups to figure out. She nodded and went back to her worksheet. Then she said, without looking up, I see things. I know you do, I said. That's a good thing. I kept seeing Anita through the divorce and for 8 months after. We talked about what gaslighting actually is. Not the dramatic version from films, the locked room and the lowered flame, but the everyday version, the slow and patient erosion of a person's trust in her own perceptions. The way it works not through cruelty but through consistency. Through 100 small corrections. Through being told again and again in the gentlest possible voice that the thing you just saw was not what you saw. I had spent years being good at the wrong things. Good at keeping the peace. Good at not asking questions I was afraid to have answered. Good at maintaining the surface of something while the interior hollowed out, and calling that maintenance a form of love. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It came in the unguarded moments driving to school, standing at the kitchen sink, once in the middle of teaching a sophomore class on color theory when I looked up at the east-facing windows and the light was doing that thing it sometimes does in late afternoon, that golden sideways thing that makes everything look like it's been painted from the inside, and I thought, I know what I see. And I trust what I see. And I will not apologize for either. There was one more thing I needed to know, and I found it in the most ordinary way possible. Through Anita in a session about 8 months after the divorce was filed, in a conversation that had not been about Daniel at all. She mentioned, carefully and with full awareness of what she was choosing to share, that the phone found in her office had been traced by her building's management company, through a complaint process, to a booking name that turned out to be an alias. The alias connected, through nothing dramatic, just a billing address, to a second phone number registered 2 years prior. Not to Daniel, but to a subsidiary email account that Peg's investigator had already linked to him through the financial disclosure process in our divorce. He had not come himself. He had hired someone who had sat in my therapist's chair and listened to me try to understand what was being done to me, and reported back. I sat with that for a long time after Anita told me. I'm still not sure what to do with it, the specific coldness of it, the precision, that a man can sit across a dinner table from you and ask about your day, and know that someone has been listening to you describe your fear of losing your mind, and say nothing, and smile, and pass the bread. But I've stopped trying to understand it the way I used to, trying to find the door into his interior that would make it make sense. Some things don't have an inside that explains them. Some things are simply what they are. I am writing this in the kitchen of a house that is mine. Just mine. I refinanced after the settlement, changed a few things, painted the living room a color Daniel had always said was too dark, which turned out to be exactly the right color, and slowly, in the way you do things when there is no one whose reaction you have to pre-manage, made it into a space that feels like the person I am when I'm most honest with myself. Lily's stones are still on her windowsill, arranged in her private color order. She has started adding pieces of beach glass she finds at the park, frosted green and blue, and one piece of rare red that she is very serious about. She tells me their names sometimes. I write them down. I went back to teaching in September with something I hadn't brought to that classroom in years, a kind of unhurried confidence in my own eye, my own judgment, my own way of seeing things. My students noticed without knowing what they were noticing. The energy in the room shifted. One of my juniors told me in November that my class was the one she looked forward to most. I wrote that down too. I don't know if I'll fall in love again. Some days I think about it and feel ready, or something adjacent to ready. Other days I am so entirely okay with my own company that the question seems almost theoretical. Both feel true. I have stopped requiring them to resolve. There is a moment I return to sometimes. Not the confrontation, not the phone in the cushion, not Mara on my front porch. A smaller moment earlier, more private. It was a night in January, months before any of this surfaced, months before I had anything real to point to. I was in the bathroom with the door locked, sitting on the edge of the tub with my phone in my hands, and I had just opened the notes app for the first time to write down something Daniel had said. Just a sentence. Just a date and a time and what had happened. And I sat there for a minute before I typed anything, aware of something very quiet and very stubborn happening inside me. A refusal I hadn't consciously organized, a small and private insistence that my version of events deserved to exist somewhere, even if only in an app on my own phone, even if no one ever read it. That was the first crack in the wall he had built. Not the receipt. Not the therapist's phone. That moment, alone in my bathroom, deciding to write things down. I had been telling myself for 9 years that I was losing my mind. Turns out I was doing the opposite. I was finding it, slowly, document by document, observation by observation, in the gaps between all the ways I'd been told not to trust what I could plainly see. The mind doesn't disappear. It waits. It keeps notes. Turns out that was enough. What this story ultimately reveals is something that gaslighting stories often obscure in favor of the dramatic reveals: the relationship between trust and identity. We tend to think of trust as something we extend toward other people. What this story shows is that the first thing gaslighting destroys is not trust in others. It's trust in yourself. Daniel's project over 9 years was not simply to deceive Claire. It was to dismantle the part of her that could recognize deception. The phone, the disputed memories, the receipts, these were not the damage. They were the tools. The damage was a woman who had learned to rehearse her own observations before speaking them out loud, to make them smaller, to preemptively protect herself from being told she'd gotten it wrong again. What's worth examining more closely is the architecture of how this happens in increments so small that each one seems almost absurd to name. A misplaced key. A dinner party she supposedly attended. A tone of gentle concern that functions, over hundreds of repetitions, as a form of erasure. The accumulation effect in this story is not metaphorical. It is the entire mechanism. None of these incidents, described individually, would cause anyone to take action. That is precisely how they work. The person experiencing them has no single evidence-bearing moment to point to. They have only a creeping, unverifiable, deeply shameful sense that something is wrong, shameful because they've been taught, by the very person causing it, that the sense itself is the problem. Mara's role complicates this in a way that deserves separate examination. Her betrayal is not equivalent to Daniel's. She did not orchestrate the gaslighting, and her silence came from a very human combination of self-interest and denial rather than cruelty. But she represents something that every story about psychological abuse contains, which is the enabling bystander, the person who sees enough to understand and chooses not to understand. Her consistent alignment with Daniel's version of events, her gentle reinforcement of Claire's forgetfulness, was not innocent, even if she told herself it was. Especially because she told herself it was. The choice Claire made to keep the notes app is the real turning point of this story, and it preceded every external event that followed. It was not an investigation. It was an act of self-respect so small it barely registered as one at the time. But it established one thing: that her experience of events was real enough to deserve documentation. That she was a reliable witness to her own life. That foundation, quiet, private, written in a phone she kept separate from the shared family calendar, was what made everything else possible. Not the confrontation. Not the divorce. The moment she decided her version of events was worth preserving. The question the story leaves open is not whether Claire survived. She did, visibly, completely. But what it costs to spend 9 years defending your own perception of reality against a person who is supposed to be your closest ally. That cost is not repaid by the resolution. It is simply what was paid. The clarity she arrived at was real and hard-won and genuinely hers. But the years before it were also real. And the woman who painted her living room the color she'd always wanted and arranged her daughter's stones on the windowsill, she deserved to be that woman much sooner. What strikes me most about Claire's story is not the betrayal itself. It's how long she spent apologizing for her own clear-sightedness. She wasn't losing her mind. She was the only one in that house trying to hold on to it. And the saddest part isn't what Daniel did. It's that she needed 9 months of written records to trust what she'd always known. I think that's the thing worth sitting with, not as a warning, but as a question worth asking yourself quietly, honestly. Are there places in your life where you've learned to make your own observations smaller before you share them? Where you've rehearsed the softer version of what you actually noticed? Because that habit, wherever it starts, is always worth examining. Claire found her way back to herself. She kept notes. She looked at the light and trusted what she saw. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.